Welcome to the African Alumni Association. My name is Henry Sully, and today we have a discussion regarding women leadership. This conversation is going to be moderated by Fatma, the panelist, and she will be introducing everyone as we start. But before that, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the African Alumni Association, the University of Toronto African Alumni Association operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across the Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Something different from what we have been doing earlier or from what we do often. Today we shall be, the African Alumni Association will be making a donation to an Indigenous group. And that group is known as, just a moment. Right. Because it serves women, it's called Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction. So the University of Toronto will be making a donation to that organization. And Fatma, one of our alumni, will be giving you details as why that is important beyond just saying words. So without any further ado, I'm going to invite Fatma to take over this conversation. So Fatma, please take over the conversation.
Hello, Sally. I would like to welcome our viewers from wherever they're viewing from. Even just amongst our panelists, we are on 3 different continents, which is exciting and wonderful. And thank you for that land acknowledgement. It is being taught to me as part of being in relations with the Indigenous peoples of the lands that I am on, to follow land acknowledgements with actions. So I am pleased that the African Alumni Association of the U of T has chosen to make a donation to the Toronto Harm Reduction organization that operates on the lands on which U of T is on. And it serves Indigenous peoples, especially those that are unhoused, which has been a very, very important aspect of our lives, especially in the past couple of years. So the Toronto Harm Reduction organization is to be found on that website. I do believe that information will be shared in the show notes. And on that note, I would like to start by introducing what we're going to talk about by sharing a video that is highlighting one of our panelists today. Sally, if you would, please.
Women shall no longer wait for timid men to fight for the liberation of Uganda. We pack missiles in our pens and grenades in our mouths and shoot our troops at the dictatorship.
Stella Nyanzi can finally relax. For years, the Ugandan activist and poet was politically persecuted in her homeland. Now she's found refuge in Germany through a Writers in Exile program run by Writers Association, PEN.
What needs to be said to dictatorships can be said, and nobody will kill me. My body won't be beaten down, and that is what freedom means, that those of us who have voice and privilege can use these voices and privilege without being penalized for doing this, and this is important.
Nyanzi is a harsh critic of Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, who has ruled the East African country for 35 years.
Stop oppressing Ugandans, Yoweri Museveni, go!
Nyanzi was arrested and put on trial for the first time in 2017. She'd accused the president of breaking his election promise to provide free feminine hygiene products. In Uganda, girls and young women often can't afford hygiene products. They're then too ashamed to go to school and miss out on their education. After reneging on his promise, Nyanzi called the president a pair of buttocks and his wife the...
Well, that could serve in lieu of an introduction to one of our panelists. But I'm going to go ahead and let the other panelists get a bit of time to internalize a bit of that video while I read the bios of our esteemed panelists, starting with Namata Suzanne. Suzanne is the executive director of Miley PLC, a Ugandan think tank in economics and development policy research. She is an educationist and a mentor with a BA in education from Makerere University in Uganda. She is a member of Kianja Metro Rotary Club, under which she is currently running a psychosocial support program in rural schools following the 2-year closure of schools due to COVID-19. She is a passionate community organizer who mobilizes her community under the Rotary to do community cleanups, paint faded zebra crossings, and plant trees. Suzanne is a wife and a mother of 4 children. And she still has free time. Sometimes she enjoys reading books, meeting close friends, and acquainting herself with local and global current affairs. The second panelist is Chantal Phillips. Chantal Phillips is a 3rd-year medical student at the University of Toronto with an interest in equity-based research that generates tangible, community-focused interventions. She is currently the project manager for Price of a Dream, which is focused on reducing financial barriers to medical school applications. From January to July 2021, she also worked as project manager of the Black COVID Resilience Health Promotion Project with Black Health Alliance. Oh, a mouthful. She completed her bachelor's degree in psychology and medical science at Western University in 2018. Our third is Daria Adele Julio. She is a registered nurse, clinical instructor, and supervisor with the Faculty of Health Science at Queen's University. She is also a professor at St. Lawrence College. Finally, to add to that lovely video, we can speak of Dr. Stella Nyanzi. Stella Nyanzi is a Ugandan human rights advocate, author, poet, medical anthropologist, feminist, queer rights advocate, and scholar of sexuality, family planning, and public health. And it is a great honor with which I get to moderate this esteemed panel. My job here is to make the space for these incredible humans to shine. Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to just take another moment to continue talking a little bit, just to talk about what brought us all here in this panel, in this space, in this link. And today is March 8th, which is also internationally recognized as the Day of the Woman. This year, according to the UN, it is the year 2020, which is pivotal for achieving gender equality in the context of climate change and environmental disaster risk reduction, which are some of the greatest global challenges of the 21st century. So without gender equality today, says the UN, a sustainable future and equal future remains beyond our reach. This conversation that we will be having today, we'll be looking at the current state of female leadership in the context of the conflicts raging all at the corners of the world, notably in Europe, as well as the various and continuous conflicts on the continent. We will look at the role of women in the conflicts, from the front lines to the responsibilities and burdens of those who stay at home or in any aspect that they're involved. So I would like to invite the participants to talk about these themes around gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. And considering that we started with a video with Dr. Stella Nyanzi, I would like to bring you to the front to talk to us a little bit about that.
Right. So thank you very much, Fatima and Henry, for bringing us together. I'm delighted to be with amazing ladies for the next few hours, 1 hour, discussing gender equality. I think what is important from the introductions is the idea that each of us is a professional woman. In my video, I talk about privilege and how we who are privileged with education, with class, with social status, with an income, even with location, because I understand the vast majority of the panel are located in the global north or in the west. And even our comrade sister who is in Uganda is located in the capital city, right? That we all occupy spaces of privilege. And in terms of talking about gender equality, we are women who have privilege and power. And I think part of what is important to the discussion is how privileged women use their privilege to endorse oppression and to endorse war and to endorse disaster, natural disasters. And I think part of the idea for me is that those of us who occupy different positions of privilege must indeed use our privileges to speak for the underprivileged. And so in the context of the wider Eastern European war, a war in the immediate post-COVID-19 times, some of our countries are still locked down, some of them are lifting the lockdown, but also in the middle of war in Europe, it's war in the middle of winter, post-COVID-19, war, refugee crisis, missiles, women staying at home, ideas around sustainability and gender equality come to the fore. And so for me, I'm really delighted to be seated with this panel of privileged, a medical person, a nurse, a professor, a psychologist. Fatima, you never told us what your location in terms of discipline is, but each of us has the ability to do something, however small. I heard of comrades who belong to NGOs in relation to whatever else, community organizing, teaching. And so the idea that women do not have to first become secretary to Putin or secretary to, whichever military technocrats we have, but that we can all contribute towards gender equality, gender equity in the world we live in is important.
Thank you, Dr. Nyanzi. I would love to hear from the next panelist. Would you please speak, Namata?
Oh, thank you so much, Fatima. As for me, our women, like Dr. Stella says, the privileged have a lot to do to help the unprivileged, to uplift them. Yes, I agree totally. Women, we are mothers, for starters. We are nurturers. We are empathetic. We are humane. We are welcoming, accommodating. So we have a lot to do. We have a lot of so many roles to play in engaging and uplifting and making sure that gender equity or equality is observed. Thinking of the roles women could do to help in gender. For example, when we think or ask ourselves how gender equity, for example, can enhance in peace building, we think of the roles it can do. We think of accountability, for example. Accountability, when women and men are given a fair, I will put it in this context, fair gender equity, fair, how should I put it? The fair treatment of men and women. So if we treat men and women fairly and create the gender equity, in the end, we create an environment where women and men can do where women and men can be accountable. Everyone is accountable for his or her actions. This helps in mitigating severity of patriarchy. So the next thing I would think of is inclusion. When we include, when we do gender equity, we create inclusion for both men and women. So that the both men and women are included in peace building. This process provides a chair for women to sit on. I'm sorry, I'm so nervous. This is my first time doing this, but I hope you cope
We
up
are
with
here
it.
with you. We are here with you. Take your time. We are here to hear your voice.
Okay.
It's a voice that is important. It is why we are at this table.
So gender equity lays a foundation for inclusion of both the males and females in peace building. So when we talk about this, when we create a foundation or a basis for gender equity, we are including the voices of the women. We are giving them a chair on the table to discuss peace, to negotiate peace. And this helps in resolving conflicts. And so I'm so sure that if women are given the opportunity to lead, women are given the opportunity into leadership, we can easily fight. We can or we can even erase the possibility of wars. For example, what is going on in Europe right now, the Ukraine-Russian war. I'm thinking of a possibility of a scenario if the president Putin was a woman. I don't think it could be this worse. Women in their nature are calm. Women in their nature are empathetic. Women in their nature they don't engage they don't have the urges to go into war. So I think, and I totally know, if we create if we create a society of women into leadership, we can possibly erase the wars, erase the conflicts, erase the violence. Then there is also what we call legitimacy. Legitimacy in a gender equally based society, it's very easy for everyone to be on board. If the women and men are given a fair share of if they're given a fair share of the issues, if they discuss issues fairly, if the women contribute fairly as the men do, it creates legitimacy. It creates public support for the ideas.
Thank you,
This is
Namata.
where legitimacy comes in.
Namata.
If both parties, yes.
Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more of these points. I would like to invite
when I'm settled perfectly, I'm sure I'm going to deliver.
Absolutely.
But I'm so nervous. This is my first time, and I hope Henry does this for me so that I can get engaged with you guys in a very normal manner. But for starters, this thing is I'm so nervous.
I am sure the rest of the panelists can also attest to the nervousness of these moments where we are put on the spot. And as I put another one of your esteemed panelists on the spot, would Chantal please speak to us?
Sure. So I think when Henry initially invited me to participate in this panel, I wondered why. But my first being that I was born and raised in the Greater Toronto area, just because of low socioeconomic status, have not traveled the world. The first time I ever got on a plane, I was 20 years old, and it was only to go to the west side of Canada. And so I, as a person who has grown up in Toronto and is back in Toronto for school, and I think has been challenged by not fully understanding what it means. Like, I'm just learning what it means to be a global citizen and to see what that looks like for myself. I questioned what I could contribute here. But I think when I first heard the question of what does it mean for women to play a role in global leadership, and would this conflict be where it is now if women were in positions of leadership? And I was really challenged by that, because I think that this concept, maybe stereotype of women being more empathetic than being more nurturers. I think there is an aspect of nature that's connected to that. But I also think women are socialized. Femininity is connected to morality for many cultures around the world. So to be a woman is to fit this confine of what moral looks like. Whereas men can still continue to be seen as masculine, regardless of what their moral compass dictates for them. And so I think for women, especially like being Christian, being in a space where oftentimes like it wasn't just you made a poor decision or you lack empathy. It's like, well, you fail to be a woman because you do not have these traits. That's something I felt a lot of tension around. And so I think that just because women are socialized to be that way, many are, that doesn't mean that men cannot also have those traits. I think if we put it to nature, we almost give men a pass to not then build emotional intelligence and empathy, and to be able to make space for women in community, around government and around war. But like recognizing that I think a lot of our socialization has to do with the way that women are perceived as leaders. So in some ways, women are perceived as empathetic, caring, nurturing leaders. But then I think that also gets framed as us being weak, us not being able to make challenging and powerful decisions. And when in fact, I think empathy, there's a lot of power in that, power that not just women, but men can benefit from too. And so I think in the context of healthcare, which is like what my background, my context, and also where I will be for however many more years I get to grace this earth. I think a lot of the times when we have women in the office, like within medical situations, a lot of the focus is on women's health, which are very important, contentious issues that need to be addressed. But women's health isn't just the health that has to do with our reproductive systems. It's social determinants of health. It's where women are living. It's how women are making money. It's how women are in community with one another and with others. So for me, it's the issue of women's leadership and being in the healthcare system as a person with privilege isn't just about the reproductive rights, which is very important, but it's also about all the other things or aspects of health that impact women and that are at risk in the context of war. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you very much, Chantal. And Daria, please take us into the home run.
Say no pressure. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to the esteemed panel. An honor to see sisters from all over the globe, and lovely to be here. I am joining you from Kingston, Ontario, and I too will be probably speaking with my hat as a health professional, and my hat as many hats, I suppose, as a past refugee and now Canadian woman, and a person who still has tied to the global South but settled into the global North. What I can say, I don't know how to put this without sounding very pessimistic, but I do recognize that over the years, I haven't been on Earth for long, but I do recognize that over the years, we are having more women accessing education and more women leaders in position of leadership, more women in charge of large, organizations and so on. Look at us here, the four of us, 5 of us. And, but, thinking about the sustainable development goals and, with a deadline of 2030, I believe, I think that there is still a great need to push for gender equity, and pay equity for women to really fit into all positions of power, of leadership, or just, in the workforce, to be, equal contributors to what goes on with our planet, with our education system, what goes on with policies, and for us to be part of decision makings locally or globally. And I believe that I read it somewhere there. It's probably on the UN Women website, but we would only be able to reach the goal of, having to reach gender equality not until 130 years from now, if we keep going at the same pace. So all of that to say that it will take a lot of advocacy, but also, like, Dr. Stella said earlier, those of us who are already in these positions, position of privilege, need to advocate for others to join us to breaking all the ceilings. But also, I believe that our counterparts, the males, men, will need to advocate for us. We will not be able to achieve success and be seen as equal without them also fighting along us. Yes, I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. I will correct a thing I had not introduced myself. My name is Fatima Kaming. I will be moderating today. I am a social entrepreneur who runs a consulting firm in social entrepreneurship in Toronto, Canada. And on that note, I want to talk about a few of the things that you've mentioned. I've heard mention of privilege, which we all recognize in some ways or another: accountability, fair treatment, inclusion, morality, social determinants of health, equity and possibility, as well as responsibility. So I would like to pose to the panel, when looking at the current state of leadership from all genders, including the one that we all identify with, where does sustainability come through? And by that, I mean sustainability not just in terms of the sustainability of the earth that we live on, in terms of climate change, but also the sustainability of the activism that comes through. Every single one of us is an activist in their own way. How are we sustainable in our activism? And yeah, anybody would like to speak to it?
I suppose I could say that myself, look into ways to mentor or ally myself with women and men, anybody who stands for what I believe in, be it health equity, human rights, women's rights, etc. To finding allies has been very important for me, and finding mentors, because I do not know everything, and I find that it has been important for me to have a group to work with, because it gives me protection. Sometimes working alone, I worry for my safety, my job security. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but if it's a group of us sending the same message, I'm less likely to be attacked, persecuted. But I don't let the fear silence me. And I keep finding similar, organization speaking on the same issues and so on. It's very, I'm originally from the DRC. I think of myself as an activist in the country specifically versus here in Canada. I would admit for myself that I wouldn't be as vocal there than I would here. And and it wouldn't be sustainable for myself, honestly, not because of the fear of persecution, but because I do not know of many women looking like me fighting for the same causes. I would hope to find better tips of sustainability from the other panelists, because I am holding on lightly to my thread.
Yeah,
Well,
I'll jump in there. Oh,
please go ahead.
As soon as you said it, from the perspective of personal sustainability, the first thought was mental health, and how I'm on my third year of medical school, and I finished my obstetrics and gynecology rotation about a month and a half ago. And I remember how many women who would come in postpartum and how stressful of a period that was for them. And part of it was very therapeutic for them to be able to convey how, like, they're just, it felt like the weight of the world was on their shoulders. They were caring for this child as a new mother. Often many of them were first time mothers. Many of them were married to men, and then they had to bear the weight of that marriage and trying to keep that together. And then they had familial expectations, and they were still trying to transition back to work. And I remember every single person who came in who conveyed these experiences. I do not yet have children or a family of my own, but I think there was a lot of fear around that. Is how do you manage all of these expectations that people place on you, and then also to be so passionate about various causes, from women's rights to all the intersections of what women's rights entail. I think there's a lot of weight and a lot of burden that women feel. And I think it goes back to the morality piece, but it also goes back to what it means for us to engage and live in community with one another, and to bear the weight of what people in our community are going through. And I think part of the sustainability is having communities where you can share what's going on. Some of these women in these clinics, they couldn't say this to anyone. They felt like if they did, they would be bad mothers. They were worried about the repercussions of voicing their concerns to their family members. And I think for women to feel that support, there needs to be more advocacy around providing covered mental health supports to women across the world, so that a lot of those concerns can be addressed, and before they bubble up and turn into something that's a lot harder to manage and to handle. But I think COVID has probably made that so much worse, is people feeling isolated, not being connected to one another, and not having access to the mental health supports that they need to do the work that they love, but the work that can be extremely challenging.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stella, I see you writing. I'm assuming you have a lot to tell us.
I write a lot. I also doodle so that I don't fall asleep. But no. In terms of sustainability, I want to peg my answer onto both previous speakers. I think that the question of mental health relates very quickly to the issue of self-care. And mental health services are provided by the government, by experts, by professionals. But I think that for a lot of us who are not within psychiatry or medical health or healthcare or even professionals in the field, that many times as women, we realize when something is wrong. And I'm not talking about self-diagnosis, but we realize when the weight of the world is on our shoulders so much. And I think that it's important for us to stress the need for self-care in the context of activism and advocacy, and even war and COVID-19, the isolation, we're doing so much for everybody else, and sometimes we forget ourselves. And so the creation of safe spaces is the next sort of little point I think is important in terms of sustainability. I think that Judy, is that how I say your name?
That's correct.
Yes, talked about the importance of creating spaces, and Chantal as well, spaces where sisterhood and the nurturing of our ideas and ideals and support and partnership is important, because sometimes we need support from others. And I think that people talked about mentorship, but I also want to introduce the layer of us reproducing our values and our value system. The notion or the idea that all women are pacifists is contestable. I think the discussion around socialization and morality. I have been judged in court as an immoral woman. Um, and so morality is also contested. What is immoral, what is amoral, what is moral is very contestable. I think some of my feminist ideals, I'm pro-abortion, for example, I'm pro-contraception, I'm pro-sex work, I'm pro-paid, equal paid work. And those values, Susan might agree or disagree with me because she's from Uganda. In Uganda, these are very immoral and Christian and orthodox and wild Western ideas. And so, although I think that it is the important stance to take as a woman, that we should have access to free judgment, free access to abortion, for example, abortion services, it is my responsibility as a feminist, as an activist, to reproduce these ideas so many other girls realize the importance of what ideals I believe in. So in terms of sustainability, while mentorship from those who are giants on whose shoulders we ride on is important, it's also important for us to cultivate downwards, whether through comradeship or we are mentoring others, or we are sharing and preaching our ideals widely is important. Because I think as women, one of the things we do quite well, again, a very contested, I don't want to be essentialist and say because you're a woman, therefore you're this, but it's quite easy for us to penetrate and interpenetrate spaces and teach, either through didactic methods or through example, be a role model, etc., etc. And one doesn't have to be a guru to share their values. And so in terms of sustainability, and going to the question around war, I'm in Germany today. The Chancellor of Germany for the last few, 1.5 decades was a woman, Angela Merkel, and she was anti-war. She's a pacifist. Last year, a man came into her position. So all the ideals that she stood for were not passed on to this new leader because he comes from a new party and he is pro-war. And suddenly we see Germany has taken a real reverse U-turn and they're now remilitarizing, and Germany has offered hardware and called back the forces to war. And so all I'm saying is, in terms of sharing our ideas, although Angela Merkel was the Chancellor of Germany, perhaps one of the strongest women in the world, in terms of sharing her pacifist values, we kind of lose them in this moment and we see a lack of continuity. And although I really believe in her leadership, I think many times as leaders, when we get to those places on top, we don't circulate as aggressively and assertively our ideas and values as men do. But I realize there's so much more to talk about. I think the last one, one of us talked earlier about partnerships and support. And I think for me that the word that came to mind is solidarity. That to offer solidarity, I heard when Henry was starting that his platform is contributing a few dollars to an organization. That is solidarity, that is financial. It doesn't have to be huge. Solidarity can be hashtagging free Nelson Mandela. Solidarity can be very many ways of doing things. And in terms of being women, I think one of the things we don't do as well as the men is to create sisterhood clubs. Solidarity is not very easy. Women are complex, we are complicated, we are menstrual and menopausal, and we are emotional, but we're also rational, and we're difficult, and we're carers, and our workloads, our time is taken away. But I think it's important for us to begin thinking about ways of doing solidarity, even when it's complicated and complex. And in the case of Ukraine, I'm thinking about women going to war. For those of us who are in the non-violent and peaceful movement, what does it mean to do solidarity with women who are picking arms in the case of defending their countries? Is there an extent to which we are open and amenable to say we shall stand in solidarity with you because we are against war and you're defending yourselves against an attacker, an aggressive attacker? But also, is it possible in the issue of race to say, Ukraine, we hear, is being very racist in terms of its refugee and access to evacuation, safe evacuation of who gets onto the train to leave Ukraine. as the Russians come on board, and women of color, brown, black, especially black African students who are studying in Ukraine have been denied access to safe evacuation. And maybe the position has changed now, but I haven't really gotten that. So how does one do solidarity with a racist or seemingly racist or nation which has some officials practicing racism against one's own? And so I think for me that solidarity is possible. Solidarity is also complicated. Sisterhood must happen in terms of sustainability, but how to do it, especially in cases where there may be conflict, right? We have to think through what we are doing as women. But I think solidarity is important and it must be done. And lastly, the issue around inclusion that Susan mentioned when she was speaking earlier, that in order to have our ideas growing and enlarged, we must be included. We must, in our differences and our varieties. So I'm pro-queer rights, and back home, the feminist movement in Uganda is totally opposed to lesbians and transgender women and bisexual people even. But the idea that one can have feminist organizing but exclude transgender women is problematic. And I think to keep pushing and ask for solidarity and sisterhood and partnership and inclusion is important. Thank you very much. I talked too much, but yeah.
Not at all. Thank you very much. I think you addressed a lot of the things. Perhaps one more thing that I should say about myself as a proud queer woman. I know that none of us is free until we are all free. And anyways, I will leave it at that and ask the rest of the panel to weigh in on some of the things that Dr. Stella just talked about, especially the parts around the remilitarization of the world. For those in Canada, we just heard in the news that our government that had a stance of actually cutting funds from the military has now pledged to add more funds to the military, something that had not been done in many years. And we are seeing the Western world spending more and more money on the military, which is money that is spent on less on healthcare, on education, on a lot of the social supports that are often leaving those that can't fend for themselves without help. So I would love to hear more from the rest of the panel about these subjects that Dr. Stella just spoke about.
Let me start with that. The militarization of the Western countries, the ones that had gone pacifists, that had gone pacifists, that they had decided to be non-violent. As of now, they have gone back to being militarized because of the conflict, because of the attack on Ukraine. This is going to hit us hard, more so us in the developing countries, because we usually get aid from the Western countries. So if they put their focus on buying military again, so it's going to hit us hard. They used to give us aid in form of medical health aid. For example, we get 40% from the United States of Africa, those NATO states. So when they go back into the early days of when civilization wasn't this much, the early days of using the gun, then it's going to hit the women even more. In Uganda, for example, mothers struggle to get mama kits. They're called mama kits. The requirements used during childbirth. The nurses know them. Even Dr. Stella, you know them. So these are countries, the NATO states, the pacifists, the countries that decided, that had gone non-violent, used to send all those things. But I don't think if they start focusing on wars, they will still do they will still send the basics they want. So this war is going to change the perception of everything. This is going to hit the women, the girls. And I think as women, we have to go to the front and fight and make sure that we make our voices heard so that this was stop. Then going back to the point of sustainability, I think it's high time society started to treat women as change agents in the peace processes instead of treating us like vulnerable humans. They should treat us like change agents. Women have played significant roles in terms of being mothers, educators, mediators, peace activists, and community leaders, coping and surviving actors, breadwinners, and decision makers. So if women are given are taken as change agents, are taken seriously, they should stop downplaying the role of women, because we know that women can do more. Women as mothers, women as leaders, women as sisters, women as wives, we can do more. They should stop treating us in that vulnerable way. For example, the crisis in Ukraine right now, the women go to the front, some in uniform, some not in uniforms, to confront the Russian soldiers, asking them to call their mothers and tell them the reason as to why they are fighting. I bet they also don't know why they are fighting. So women can play a very big role in creating peace in communities. There is need to provide funding and capacity building to women on peace and security issues at the national, regional, and continental levels in order to acquaint them with peace and security knowledge, which will enable them to fully participate in conflict prevention, management, mediation, reconciliation, and peace building. So that's my take.
Thank you very much, Susan. That is all incredibly important. I would like to highlight especially the part of the different roles in which women can actually play when it comes to moments of conflicts. It is true that the effects of the Ukrainian war would be heavily felt in the global south, considering also that the Ukraine is actually the breadbasket of the world. They produce, I think, about 30% of the wheat of the world, which will have incredible ramifications for the rest of the world. I also want to hark on something that's particularly African in terms of the way that women have made their voices heard in ways that are very unorthodox, like, for example, the sex strikes that happened in West Africa historically as a way of as a way of bringing something in there. There have been many ways in which women have come into the conversation when it comes to conflict resolution. And I love your call for capacity building for women to be able to be active participants in the process of peace building. Anybody else would like to chat? Chantal? Daria?
Sure. I also think that when it comes to leadership, like there's aspects of like soft leadership, things that there's this question of like, are leaders born or are they made? And I think that there's a level of like expertise and training that comes on the job of being a leader in community, being a leader like when you're in school, being a leader when you're at home. There's like ways to develop leadership in your own context, but I think there's also there's privilege associated with being able to develop the skills associated with leadership that are more often taught and then finessed. And I think that when it comes to women having access to education and access to opportunity to like learn those skills, that like that's another barrier, something else to be considered. That I think when it comes down to whether it's business degrees or local community leadership, just having the opportunity to participate, to be actively involved, and so it doesn't have to look. Just having a business degree doesn't make you an amazing leader, but I will say that there are some skills that you gain from being in those spaces, thinking about historically what types of leadership tactics and approaches, strategies have worked, and you can learn that in a classroom, or you can learn that from sisters, like we were talking about earlier in terms of mentorship. But if that doesn't happen, if there is not that type of training, I think that it can be challenging to feel the courage to take up that role as a leader and to being an effective leader. I think part of it is when we're in these spaces, what does it mean for women to be able to harness those skills so that leadership is effective?
Thank you very much, and thank you for that question. Daria? And also, I would like to acknowledge that Chantal will be leaving us at 4:20.
What can I add to this? Maybe just a comment, because I did note at some point during Dr. Stella Nyanji's speech there. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said something about women, or maybe that women are perceived as emotional and hormonal and so on. And I just remembered that so far in my career, I've been in rooms where men were in charge and they were emotional. And I think of Putin, it takes a certain kind of emotional dysregulation to choose to kill life and not choose peace. And I honestly believe that if it was a woman in power, that there will be more of bringing in others rather than separating and killing in wars and so on. I was just thinking about it to myself, because I feel like, we're more pacifist and we like to bring things together. We like to keep, we like to collect, we like to grow and nurture. And I think the other thing I was reflecting on was access to education. Just as Fatima shared, Chantal shared earlier. It's, I think of myself as a young girl in a refugee camp and not having access to education and so on, and what led me to be who I am today. Yes, access to education would have helped me reaching certain of my goals faster and allow me to, like I said, finesse my way through, spaces in this global South or global North. But, I just want to say that what really drove me to have the comfort to do what I do and to speak my mind was to really see people like me doing the work, to be in rooms like this and discussing these matters, and also growing and noticing that, sorry, my eyes are watery, and also noticing that Africa is flourishing, and young people are studying more, be it abroad or at home, and mothers are doing more than raising children at home, and they're professionals and they're business leaders and so on. So, excuse me. And I guess in that sense, I don't know. I'm I don't know if I should say this, but I feel like for world peace to become a reality and for women's right to become a reality, African nations are going to need to level up. There are certain things I have tried to push for, be health equity or women's right from where I'm at. But I find that folks back home are not there yet, cannot politically or whatever. And I wish that as a society globally, we could all just, agree on the same agenda, and push all these issues forward for humanity, really. Because for as long as, each continent or each nation will not really agree on principles, what are we fighting for? That's all I can say.
Can I quickly come in
Please.
and just say that you raise an important question around power, right? Africa perhaps is at the bottom of the power ladder, right? Our specific countries, in terms of coming to the negotiation table, our different agendas, first of all, we don't even agree. We are so divided by colonialism and our colonial histories. It's wonderful to see a sister from a Francophone country speaking English, right? But our colonization is total, and it means that the Francophones don't speak with the Anglophones, don't speak with the Lusophones, don't speak with the Arabophones. And we talk of ourselves, Africa is perhaps the only continent that has all the racial categorizations, black, brown, white, but we still talk of ourselves in separation. I think, first of all, we are fragmented and disunited. So we don't even have a singular agenda. And for our issues to come to the table, United States of America, a whole continent, perhaps plus Canada, is together. Latin America is a continent with many countries, but I think Africa is very divided. Part of the issue why our issues never come to the table is because of powerlessness that was created by these histories, long histories, first slavery, then colonialism, then underdevelopment, then, etc. We don't even have an African country among the NATO states. When people are negotiating around nuclear and Russia and Putin, we don't have any stake there. We don't even have a say, right? But so the issue of power is important. And I think for me, again, that is why we need, as African women, as Black women, as women interested in the issues around the global South, to represent our ideas and sow them like wild seeds all over, penetrate wherever we can. And so it's good to have people from Ontario, people from Toronto, people from the global North intercoursing with us in the global South. I wanted to also talk about the issue around, so different issue, but the refugee experience and the question around emotionality, whether women are naturally emotional and men are rational, etc. In the case, so I was a child as a refugee. When I was about 5 years old, my parents fled to Kenya because of civil war. First my father, and then my mother followed with the children. And then in the last year, 2021, I had to flee again from Uganda with my children, and today I live in exile. In the context of war, taking the Ukrainian example right now, we see many times again that the traditional gender roles of women as nurturers coming to the fore, where men must stay in Ukraine and pick up arms, and women are allowed to go with children. So mothers, daughters, grandmothers even are the vast majority of Ukrainians getting onto those trains to flee for refuge in other European nations. And I think around the refugee question that more and more the role of women comes to the fore, because we become the carers of those who are fleeing. We become the carers of the wounded that are sent either to hospital or to refugee establishments, and the idea that women are better carers. I think for me, as a feminist, I'm struggling. We've seen Ukrainian women at the forefront of picking up guns and all of that, but I think in terms of the reasoning around the role of women, again we see the whole world, even the Western world, going back to these very traditional, binary separations between women will take care of the sick and the children who have to flee, and then men will stay and fight the Russian monster. And I don't know how we can get past this. Yeah, past this very traditional way of thinking around world peace and the refugee question. I think in terms of bearing the burden of Putin's war, that again, after the missiles have stopped and everything, that women are going to need to clean up. The vast majority of wounded will be the men at the front lines. The vast majority of negotiators are going to have to be women. The vast majorities of builders of communities again after the war are going to be women. And so while my sister called for Africa to level up, to quickly come to the table, I'm calling for women to muscle up, because the burdens of cleaning up after any war often fall on us. And yet the burden of running away to safety and ensuring that there's a new Ukraine after the war is also on us. So we are kind of playing double. And in the case of Ukrainian sisters currently picking up arms, I think what they have seen is what they have shown or portrayed is the warrior nature of women. We can also fight, like we can fucking pick up the fucking guns and defend our countries. And that is commendable, because often those of us who are pacifists and in the non-violent peaceful movement, we almost always demonize the role of the gun. But we see women taking up guns while women are still running on 2 trains and running under shelters and taking care of sick people and praying and crying. We also see women doing all these things. So it's as if we have all these double shift loads. So Africa has to arise, yes, but also women have to do these almost a million workloads at the same time, parallel. So I think we shouldn't even be asking whether women are custodians of peace. We are custodians of peace. Like, don't even question it. We are doing so much work that is not recognized. Getting on those trains, packing those children, wiping those tears, comforting a whole nation. We hold world peace in our hands against monsters. And so the question shouldn't be, could women make better? We are doing so much as women in our different locations. Yeah. Okay.
And it's interesting because, like, the what you said there, that was amazing. But it is unrecognized work, right? It's work that when we look at who is deemed as like valiant, who is given fair share or fair dues for that work, who's being recognized, that usually it's it's those who lost their lives in war. Not saying that they should not be recognized, but what about all of these people, these families, women who are left behind, to then keep everything together and to be able to mourn the losses, but then also to be the ones to keep it together. And I think that's the labor that there's a burden associated with it, and it's not recognized in the same way. I don't think that women who are in those positions are respected in the same way, are acclaimed the same way. And it's so easy to not just forget. Even when I think of myself, like it wasn't until I was an adult where I was as appreciative of my mother and all of the things, all the sacrifices that she needed to make for me to get to where I am now. I think it takes a while to be able to recognize these things, because if they're your reality, if you're just so used to very powerful, strong women being in your corner and being around you, then it's so easy to overlook, because it's normal. It's the norm for you. And it's not until you are a woman yourself and you're an adult and you have responsibilities where you recognize just how much that burden is and can be. And often women don't receive the roses for that.
Thank you, Chantal. And so then my question to all of you is, how do we redefine what leadership looks like? Because leadership seems to be imbued with these masculine, loud qualities, whereas we know from experience and from our own lives that leadership, at least from the feminine sense of it, is a little bit more subtle. How do we redefine leadership? How do we remove the patriarchy from leadership is what I'm saying.
I suppose, one easy answer for me is to diminish the power hierarchies and work more horizontally. where comradeship, I mean, we began the language already: comradeship, sisterhood, partnership, inclusion, participation, sitting around the table. And that for me is a lot more palatable, yeah, where we are sitting around the dining room table at home. For those of us who have dining room tables, some of us sit on mats, or we sit, God knows what. We have no sitting rooms, so we sit dining rooms. We have, I don't know what studio rooms where people sit on their bed. But to sit together and share in communal. I mean, this sounds so stereotypically cliched African, but that Ubuntu idea around we sit together and you may be more senior to me, but we can learn from each other. I can lead and you can lead. I will follow. Seems one way of doing feminist leadership. I don't know how it would work in the case of Putin. Yeah, in terms of leadership, where perhaps we sit as allies and comrades and colleagues. And seniority is important, it is acknowledged, but it is not the foundation for power, that we can all share in power, perhaps not equitably, but more horizontally is one way of doing leadership. But that is me speaking without thinking too much. I might refine my position on this.
Thank you. Daria, you're unmuted, so.
Oh, I do agree with Dr. Nyanji. Nyanzi, I mispronounced, apologies. Sharing the power would be important for, men or the few women already in those positions. And it's true that in a society like where I am, you have a person at the top, and then you have an assistant, and whoever else at the bottom. And you see, I even say at the bottom. But myself in my roles, what I do is that I work with everybody else. It's a bit of, I find that it unsettles. It does unsettle people because they do expect direction. They do expect you to fix things, but what I call for is it's sort of a unity of we bring our brains together, and whenever there are issues or disagreements, maybe I could steer us in the right direction with your consultation, sort of things. But it's going to take many years of unlearning and re-educating society, our men, to not fear sharing the power, and also at the same time for many of us to recognize our privileges. And how long is that going to take? I do not know, but I do realize, I can only speak for my faculties, we are starting to have these talks in classrooms. And my hope is that the newer generation and the generation after, the situation will be a little bit, there will be less disparities, and more sharing of power, and more access for everybody to be decision makers, to be part of any political or no matter what the topic, discussions. In terms, when it comes to, I don't know, I'm thinking about the leadership of a country, for example. I don't know when, it's certainly not my lifetime, but when would it be possible to not even think twice when you have a woman running for a seat versus a man, and who is supported by the majority of the population? But my hope is that gender would not be a barrier in the future. But unfortunately, for now, I think all we can do is educate, and dismantle all of these issues.
Thank you, Daria. Susan?
Oh, yes. So dealing with patriarchy is not going to be easy as we talk. Men love power. It excites them. So the idea of thinking that women are going to overtake it, it's a wild dream. But I would suggest that we continue encouraging, educating, creating spaces for women we continue encouraging them to participate in the hierarchy, the political offices, the political slots. For example, in our countries, we have what we call affirmative action, where women are given a platform to contest against women, not men. So by that, we shall be climbing the political or the power ladder slowly, but patriarchy, we can't fight it as it's going to take centuries to fight the idea of sharing power with men. Men with power, it's like a magnet, but at least we have a starting point. For example, the new Vice President of America, Kamala Harris, for a fact, countries in African countries tend to copy what the West does. So that gives us a platform, gives us a starting point. So women can learn from it. Women can start pursuing those big offices, because practically women in power, that's a peaceful world. That's a sure deal. So countries that have female leaders, they continue to expand. That's a fact, and we thank God for that. We have female leaders in high offices. So we can start with that, and they can also encourage. If at all they can encourage the others pursuing the same, they encourage them, they motivate them, then women we can start talking about power. We still have a very long journey, but we can reach there.
Thank you, Susan. I want to throw something in the conversation. A quote by Black lesbian feminist writer and activist Audre Lorde from the United States. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So we are talking about power. We are talking about systems that already exist that were put in place to oppress, that were put in place to disenfranchise us. They were put in place to polarize. They were not put in place to make peace. The world was not built as is for peace. I would love to hear a little bit about what you have to say about that, starting with Chantal, that has to go in about 3 minutes.
It's funny. That was perfect timing, because that also did come to mind, that I think that when it comes down to representation, inclusion, like those are really important first steps, is just getting in the room and then sitting at the table and then having your voice heard. But then when that starts to happen, I think that no one is immune from forgetting where you came from. No one is immune from the enticing nature of power. And so as much as we think that men might be more, I don't know if this is just a stereotype, but when men are in power, that's something that they cling on to. But I don't see why women being in power wouldn't also want to cling on to that power. Power feels good. Power, it's like there's an adrenaline that comes with knowing that, especially if you have started at the bottom, I put bottom in air quotes, that now that you're at the top, that you are in full control of sometimes like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And so I think that there's a lot of internal work that needs to happen, that I don't think we actually think much about. Once a person that we trust is in power, that they still need to be accountable. Just because there's someone who looks like us, just because there's someone who we can relate to, they still need to be accountable to someone. They need to be accountable to the people who elected them. They need to be accountable to themselves, and they need to be able to be put in a community, in a space of people who they trust to keep them accountable when they start shifting from whatever values or goals initially got them to that position of power in the first place. And I don't think these existing tools they don't really include accountability. They include hiding the things that you do. And if you make a mistake, there's a lot of shame that comes with making a mistake. And I think if leadership shifted for us to be able to do that in community, be held accountable in community, then that shift away from perhaps traditional leadership would allow for us to make decisions and to be in positions of power, regardless of men or women, and to like use that leadership for the collective empowerment and liberation, instead of just being in a position of power and not really using it for the betterment of the society that you're representing. So there needs to be accountability. There are a different model of accountability than I actually think currently exists.
Thank you very much. A different model for accountability. Daria, Dr. Stella.
I mean,
like Dr. Stella.
Right. So in terms of the question that was asked directly about Audre Lorde's quote, "The master's tools," and also in response to Susan's answer around patriarchy and women and access to the top, but also pegging that onto Chantal's important point about accountability, that we need a new model of accountability. I think what I want to say, which is slightly different, is that Chantal said women will have to enter the room and then get to the table and then get to the chair. That is one way of doing it, that we get into these spaces where men with power have power and we perform power like they're doing. The other model is to smash the table, throw away the chairs, and recreate our own sitting patterns. It is one thing for women to get to the top. I mean, Susan is aware, very much as the rest of you are, that there are greater percentages of women in political office, right? The example of Kamala Harris is important, but then there are very many women in Africa today, where, for example, in Rwanda, we have 40% of the parliament being comprised of women. In South Africa, I think South Africa has even beaten Rwanda. In Uganda, we're not doing too badly either. And part of the critique I have as a feminist on the margins is that when these women get to the top, when these sisters and comrades of ours enter parliament, enter the justice system, enter even private sector, corporate business world, they don't work for women. Okay. And so we have women leading the Ministry of Health in Uganda. The minister, Ruth Acheng, and the minister, Diana Atwine, are behaving as if they don't have wombs. The priorities become very much the priorities of the patriarchs in power, right? A woman, the wife of President Yoweri Museveni, Janet Kataha Museveni, is the Minister of Education. And although she's called Mama Janeti and the mother of the nation, she locked down our schools for 2 years as if she's not a mother, okay? And when schools were closed, the children did not have access to alternative means of learning. Young girls got pregnant. There was a whole debate about when the schools opened, should these young students go back to school or not? And the Minister of Health, who is the mother of the nation, seemed to be acting as masculine as the aggressive patriarchs were acting. And so getting women into power is not necessarily changing the status quo of underprivileged women. And so alternative modes of accountability that Chantal has highlighted may be the way to go. But also the issue around skilling us. Begin skilling women when we are young. Begin teaching and educating us about the values that matter, such that when we get into power, we shall do things differently. We don't have to sit at that table where men are prioritizing security and defense, but forgetting education and health. Perhaps the women will have to smash those priorities and reset the priorities. So slightly different to the idea that we cannot fight the patriarchy. I'm a radical feminist. I'm a radical queer feminist who thinks actually we are fighting the patriarchy every day. And our wins are small, but when we begin winning the mind, decolonize our minds, we teach ourselves it's possible, we teach our young girls it's possible, we look at our history and see where women penetrated very masculine spaces and reinvented the space, that it is actually possible to take back power for ourselves and do things for ourselves, and to keep reminding our women leaders, our women in positions of power, that they represent an underprivileged gender, and never to forget the underprivileged women. That is how we begin to make inroads. For me, it's a daily commitment that we have to keep this combat going. I'm quite combatant, but we see inroads and success. We cannot begin from a position of saying, oh, men are addicted to power, we won't take the power from them. We can also get addicted to power. There is everything human in getting access to power. And I think what women must be able to do is to make that power work for us. And the question around male champions that I saw highlighted, but also a question that I think Susan raised the issue of we need male champions, is important, because I have found sometimes that the allies that matter, so the person who talked about get allies, get mentors, some of the best sort of allies and partnerships that work are men with power, because they can share some of this power, they can share some of these skills, they can open the doors for us. And male champions are important, especially when we think it is impossible, when it seems like the lion's share goes to the men, because these men are our lovers, our fathers, our sons, our our brothers or whatever, and to make them understand that a bird has wings, a bird can't fly on one wing, it's lame, and to constantly remind, and if we're going to do gender as a binary, men and women, I mean, there are all sorts of gender alternatives, but if in this binary way of thinking about power, that we need each other to fly and balance well. And we can't say the power will go to the men and the women will be the lame arm. We must keep returning the balance. And sometimes the way to do it is to get male champions.
Definitely. And accomplices in the form of all allies of all genders. When we're talking about this fight, I will repeat again that until we are all free, none of us is. And Daria, I think I'll cede the floor to you.
I'm glad that Dr. Nyanzi spoke on that, but what I wanted to talk about was decolonization and the need to unlearn what any person coming from a nation that have been colonized, by Western culture, and to remember how things were before colonization. I'm not an historian. I did not grow around parents or grandparents talking about the way of life before the white men arrived. But from bits and pieces that I have heard so far, also combined with what I have learned from Indigenous peoples in Canada, I believe that women were leaders in society until things just went wrong and changed. And there is a way to go back to that, but I realized that there is a lot of fear. And also men, when I speak with men in leadership positions or men who clearly have the privilege to move around society, and anybody else I know, they speak of not really, it's a bit, as if they're a bit of cowards, but they talk about not knowing what to do. This is how it is, and how there is no way to change it. But, not only would we need to decolonize our way of thinking and doing things, we would also need to be very radical. Without wanting to do things properly and patiently, it's just going to take longer than it needs to. And for people to accept, when we would need to agree that adopted Western cultures and ways of doing things really damaged many societies. Until we speak that truth and agree to change, and also position ourselves in position of power to then be able to act, none of that would happen. And I realize that, I'm saying this and I'm totally privileged, but, what am I trying to say here? It's just, we will need, because I find that quite often, we're not fighting either. And Dr. Nyanzi spoke on that. We need to get into rooms and break the table and remodel it and so on. So many of us would need to do that. Men would need to do that as well. And to say that I cannot change things. This is how it's always been. I'm going to lose my job if I don't speak. And nobody would hire me again. Then I will be shot. If I do not, well, then if you do not, many others will suffer the consequences generation after generation. So stand up and stand for what is right. And it's surprising once you start talking, when you start speaking about these issues, how many of us, come together and say, oh yeah, I've been thinking about this. Thank you for bringing this up. And, that just comes to show that what we really need is also safe spaces. And feeling secure that, for sharing these radical thoughts and whatever, your distaste of colonization in Western cultures, and that would not lead to you losing some of your privileges. And so, anyways, I'll leave it at that.
None of us asked for permission to be where we are, at least all four of us. And I hear a lot from all of us being a lot softer, but in our personal lives, in order to achieve the things that we have achieved, none of us asked for permission. We did what we had to do. The cultural change doesn't happen when we ask for permission. It happens when we do. And I'd like to hear about that. I want to hark back on some of the things that I've heard in this conversation, especially around the socialization of young women, and how, as we are brought up, we are taught to either dream in this box or dream a little bigger. And given who we have access to, we get to dream a little bigger or a little smaller. I would like to hear about not asking for permission and what it will take for this cultural change to happen. I would also like to read the comment that's right here, that underprivileged men understand suppression, and it's easier to unlearn the societal stereotype subtly if the right approach is employed. I don't know what is this right approach, but I'm quite personally tired of these right approaches. And I would like to hear some of the wrong approaches that are working and would work.
Going back to there was a comment in form of a question that what role do men play towards the race? What role do men play as allies in the race towards gender equity? So men have a very big role. They have an important role in promoting women's economic rights. In institutions and societies where men are the bosses, they are the CEOs, they are the bosses practically. They have a very big role to play in making sure that the equity, the equity of the gender is observed. So the men, they promote our women's economic rights and independence. They employ the women Then there is a thing we call maternity leave when we get pregnant and have to go and nurse the pregnancies and the babies. So these men have to chip in. They have to let these women go nurse the babies, give them time. Then after, they allow them to come back to work. So all those are roles men are supposed to play to make sure that there is gender equity or equality in societies. They control economic resources and full participation in decision making. They have to let the women also control the economic resources. They should also give us a pass. They should also give us a participation. Let us participate in decision making. So this is how men can help in the role they can play in equity, in gender equity. And also us as mothers, we have to start teaching our young boys. We have to teach them about the stereotypes of women. For example, the African culture, like you always say, we have to relearn. In Africa, there are these, particularly in our societies, the Uganda setting, for example, that's where I live, so that's where I know. There are the sayings that women are supposed to be in the kitchen, women are supposed to bear kids, women are supposed to nurse kids. It's not the men's work. So we have to change all that, the stereotyping. We have to tell our boys that you have to be included when you're dealing with this. You have to also help out. You also have to go to the kitchen. You also have to help in the nursing of the baby. It's not supposed to be the work of the lady only. So when we do this, we shall see a very big change in future, and we shall be fighting the problems of downplaying women. It has to start from the bottom. We have to change the mindsets. Dr. Stella, anyone can take over.
Thank you.
Right. So the issue around socialization that Susan has mentioned is important. I mean, listen, in terms of going to the question about is there a right approach, and the question around do we ever, everything I've achieved, I never got permission. So these permissions that women are expected to first obtain, I want to tie all three. And so socialization and teaching young boys that they are partners, they are feminist is important. I have trained my children to be feminists and to be pro-queer people and to be good human beings because I think any man that is a feminist is a good man. Any man who's anti-feminist is in trouble with me, so they can't live in my house. And of course, it's not easy because my children have imbibed and eaten and drunk the very patriarchal standards that Susan was talking about. Girls cook and boys, girls cook and boys. What do boys do? I don't know. Fight with pistols or whatever. So Putin is running mad with pistols because his mama told him boys play with guns and girls play with dolls. And that is dangerous. I think that so one of the very practical ways in which I have refused to take permission is having grown up in the family of a woman whose womb, whose belly only bore 4 girls. And she was a reject of my father's family who sent my father into polygamy because although he's a medical doctor, he believed the stereotype that my mother was responsible for just bearing daughters. And so he went looking for sons. And as luck could have it, his second wife and his third wife bore him boys, right? But in my mother's house, because of the shame of raising just daughters, she didn't have the luxury of teaching me not to climb a tree or teaching me not to play with electricity. All the girls in my home grew up under the training to be efficient, to be both girls and boys. And so my mother would say, one clever girl is as good as 10 stupid boys. And in my right from when I was a young child, I was trained that what a boy can do, I can do better. I can do as well or better. It was the expectation from my mother. And so when I went into university, and I went to all girls boarding schools, when I went into university for the first time and I had to interact with men and boys in class, I did not understand the idea among girls and women who thought, the boys have to speak fast. Oh, the boys think better, because my mother didn't have the luxury of thinking that she's going to raise girls who thought they were any less than boys. And so I haven't had the disadvantage of needing permission from anyone, father, brother, husband, lover, president, whoever. If I need it, I go for it. And I think that helped me in terms of deciding quite early that I want to do a PhD. My father is a medical doctor. He did not think that any of my mother's children, the girls, would become important. So I fear blood. I can't deal with blood products. And then about early teenagehood, I discovered there was a way to become a doctor and get my father's affirmation and approval, and that was getting the PhD. I will become a Dr. Nyanzi, just as my father was Dr. Nyanzi. And so right from an early age, I said, I'm going to get this PhD. People say to me, you're just a girl. You're a poor girl. You're a girl from Masaka. Masaka is a rural district. You're from Uganda, and Uganda has had war. Yada, 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 yada. And I always said, I'm going to get this PhD. And I looked for funding when there was no fundraising and scholarships coming to Uganda. But I looked for funding, and I got funding from the Americans, from the British. People were competing to fund me, and I got my PhD. And what I'm saying is, even as I was doing the PhD in the UK, in London, there was always the issue of, oh, you're third world people, and oh, you don't know how to use libraries, and oh, you don't know how to use the computers. And I said, I'd learn. And the idea that I'm going to get my PhD, and I'm going to get it at whatever cost, helped me reach for the skies. So ideas that women should first bear children. Of course, there's a cost to pay. My classmates were getting married. I was busy in the libraries. They were getting babies. I was busy in the libraries. They were celebrating the naming ceremonies of their children. I was celebrating degrees. And there's a stigma around, that girl of yours, when is she bringing a man home? And so the permission to be single or not to be single, I don't need permission to say, I am going for children after I get my books and I make my money and I travel the world. But there's a stigma around, she has broken every expectation from society. So we are socialized that a good woman in Buganda marries, has 3 children. I don't know what else they do. I did not need that. I set my priorities, and I think for me it was around the socialization that my mother allowed us as children to be whatever we are. And I know I've talked for so long, but I think core to achieving what I did was a very supportive mother who protected us and protected our values even when she did not agree with them. And so later on, my mother is very Christian, the daughter of a reverend. Later on, when I become a feminist and a radical queer feminist, and I'm looking for places to hide my gay friends and my lesbian friends at a time when Uganda is highly homophobic and there's a whole lookout for homosexual people, I could hide these people in my mother's house. And one could see the terror on her face. Oh my God, what will my friends say? What will the women at church say? But she said, Stella, these are your friends. I don't know how to deal with them. They are your friends, girls who look like boys and boys who behave like girls. But in the 2 months my queer friends were hiding in my mother's house, she grew to love them. She grew to understand what queerness is. And my mother didn't need permission from her church to allow her daughters, very controversial friends, to come and hide there. And I think that refusal to be acceptable comes from familial socializations. What am I saying? I'm saying something. But sometimes we have to break the norms. We have to stand out and stand for what we believe in, stand and support our children, our friends, even when they are being radical, and of course, even when we don't believe in what they may espouse. And the very last point is, some of my radical beliefs and practices have taken me to prison. Okay? I'm very antagonistic. I use vulgar, radical protest. I undress. I don't expect any of the other panelists to be nude protesters, but I'm happy to throw off my clothes in court, happy to throw off my clothes on TV and make a point, because sometimes the ears of those that hold power are deaf, and if we wait for them to give us permission to speak, they'll never do it. So we force ourselves into their audience, and they hear a woman whose big breasts are bared, and she's screaming things, give us sanitary pads, or fuck the system. When I went to prison because of my radical modes of protest, the last thing, my family and my sisters stood with me. When the whole world said Stella Nyanzi is mentally sick because she undresses in public as a sign of protest, when they tried to put me in prison and called me a criminal, my sisters and my family stood with me and said, we don't believe in what she does, but she is our sister and we shall stand with her. And that sort of solidarity with others, solidarity by others, us standing in solidarity with others, helps more women, more underprivileged people to break these barriers. When somebody does something you don't believe in, but you understand the politics and praxis of what she's doing, it's important to stand with her. If she's your sister or your comrade at work or your village mate or I don't know, a politician elsewhere, stand with that person. And that is how we change how power is played, when minorities have allies from privileged people who say, we don't understand her methods, but we stand in solidarity with her. It is important. And that is how we make inroads without waiting to be given permission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are quarter to the hour, and I would like to start bringing this very rich conversation to some sort of nice bow to send the people to. I have learned so much. My brain is a Twitter. I would love for us, each one of us, to speak a little bit as to a few words to send everybody away with. For me, it would be something about safe spaces and brave spaces, and all our responsibility as leaders in our own rights to create those spaces, to be brave enough to do so, and to create the community that can support us to do that. In order for us to be sustainable in our fight, in our activism, in our own lives. And I will open the floor to Susan for some last words. Susan, we do not hear you.
I was unmuted. Oh, thank you, Fatima. My last words would be, if we could, and put emphasis on the safe spaces for women, the arena with the stakeholders, creating arenas for women to participate in politics freely. Now, the example of Dr. Stella, she can't participate freely in Uganda. She only does from exile. In Uganda, she was brutally imprisoned, she was tortured. We have the other person is a male. I won't include him in that discussion. But for women, I just hope that the stakeholders, the governments, put safe spaces for us to express freely, the freedom of speech, to talk about the things that hurt us. Then those women in power, for example, the ones in parliament, to work for women, not the patriarchs like Dr. mentioned earlier. They should work for women. They should find out what the things, the needs of women, what do women really want, the girls in secondary schools, what troubles them, how can we help them out? The curriculum, is it helping the girls, the boys? Is it helping in any way? Then also it goes back to us, the women, the parents. We should change the mindset. We should change the whole process, the whole thing. We should teach our sons, our daughters to stop the stereotypes, the bias, everything. Everyone should be inclusive in this fight against gender inequality. Everyone should be inclusive in making sure that women strive and women are heard. Their voices are heard. Women also should strive hard to make sure they get a chair at the table and discuss matters, discuss peace, negotiate power. We need a world free of violence. The wars affect us women most, that is for sure. Because when this wars comes, that means they'll hit the hospitals. When women need these hospitals, when it's time for childbirth and there is no hospital, that's traumatic. These wars bring a lot of unsettlement. So the conversation is wide and goes back to everyone. Everyone is subjected to deal with this. Thank you so much for hosting us. I pray for another time, another opportunity. I'll do better. Thank you so much, Henry. And Dr. Stella, I'm so happy meeting you virtually though. I love you so much. Thank you for being our mouthpiece. You speak a lot. The things that we are scared of speaking, for you, just air them out. At least you help us. You help us by telling those dictators that you tell them out. Thank you so much, Fatima.
Thank you, Susan. That was beautiful. Daria?
What else can I say? The two ladies spoke so beautifully and said essentially everything as a take-home message. I guess I could keep on saying, one last word could be decolonize your systems. I understand that we need money for everything and capitalism would rule a little bit longer than we wanted to. Then maybe it is up to us to find ways to use it for our benefit. I don't know how. We didn't even touch on money here today, but my home where I'm from would always be dear to my heart. And it breaks me that there is nothing I can do about it. I cannot change the course. I cannot influence policies. I cannot, open my mouth without fearing being shot dead. Another last thing I can say is for our brothers, the men, to really start speaking up and asking for changes, because like I said it earlier, we cannot fight for these rights alone, and everything we fought for will benefit every single human being on the planet, and the planet itself, and the animals, and the plants, and the waters. Women are just invaluable, and we've been neglected for so long. Just imagine, like, so many of us coming together to brainstorm about solutions and so on, rather than just, less than half of us or half of us doing the work. We would contribute so much to society. And if society would like to keep capitalism, well, a bunch more of us can contribute to it. But, the only way we can do it is with men, pushing these issues forward together with us, for our leaders to listen to their communities, their population, and really focusing on equity, and using that to what am I trying to say? Using equity to create policies, rather than, focusing on their, reputation of power, and, just caring about their position or whatever the political agenda is, but really going back and, thinking equity. Let me just summarize what I just said there. Equity and decolonization. Those two things.
Thank you, fellow Francophone, third, fourth language speaker.
You have no idea how hard it is on English here.
I see you, sister. Dr. Stella, would you like to take us home?
Right. So I think for me, there are some very practical lessons I learned from Susan, that first times are important. And just to see you participating has been very, very empowering, because how many times do we let first timers into our spaces? And I think you did a brilliant job. I think from Daria, I learned, I'm in Germany and I'm struggling against learning German, but from you, your fluency, your ability to eloquently express your ideas has encouraged me around being more than just Anglophone. I'm very fluent in English, fluent in Luganda, but I can do what you're doing. You're Franco best, DRC, you speak French, but you also speak in very good English. And to be able to do that would be amazing. So take home lessons. I think what's important for me, and maybe the last practical lesson, is to just own up our identities. I loved how Fatima, having a religious Islam name, also said, hey, I'm also queer. And I think for me, the idea that we can break these barriers, even in our introductions, I'm Fatima, I'm a queer woman, very, very empowering lessons. In terms of the topic we were discussing, I think the decolonization message was really new and fresh to me, and the need for us to go back to our histories that are not told by our current generation, and to reclaim for us ways of doing better peacekeeping, world peace work as women. The idea from Chantal around so that was the feminist leadership part. I think that was Fatima's question. How do we do feminist leadership better? And I think for me that is fresh, because in terms of thinking about leadership, we're all saying, get to the top, get to the top, get to the top, be like a man, grab power like a man. But I think it's important in terms of productivity. It's been good for me to start thinking again about how would we do leadership in ways that benefit us much better than the current structures and systems of leadership in place. And I think we can do more thinking around that. The point from Chantal around skilling and finesse, I think, is important in terms of leadership, that many of us are educated, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have the leadership qualities that we need. So how do we teach women graduates or women doctorates to be effective world peace negotiators, better peace negotiators? I think it's a special skill that is required. And I think the point she made around women do a lot of care work in war, but we don't get roses, right? A lot of work has been done around equal pay and equal valuation of women and men, but no one has talked about giving women roses, even when we are mourning and grieving and rebuilding societies at the end. And the very last one, I think, is the idea of let us grab power and not wait for permission. So it's been really, really lovely evening. Thank you very much for convening us together. And hopefully next International Women's Day, we shall still be going strong, and maybe we'll meet again. Thank you, Henry, for the space.
I will also ask Dr. Stella Nyanzi and anyone here who has a product for sale out there to talk about it, such as books, products, courses, anything that you have that we can help you with, a fundraising thing for the organization that you run, whatever it is that you would like to share in this moment.
Right, so very quickly, I am a poet. I have written 2 books. One I published when I was in prison. I was in prison for writing a poem against Yoweri Museveni, who's the president of my country. And during the time I was in prison, I published a book. It's called No Roses from My Mouth. I can give the PDF to Henry to share with everybody who's participated in this. I have a second book of poetry that I published last year, and that will be on Amazon. And it's called Don't Come in My Mouth, nothing sexual about it. It's telling dictators not to put words in our mouth. And Henry, again, will have access to the Amazon link. But the PDF will be freely available, for the first book will be freely available to everybody who's participated in our International Women's Day gathering. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stella.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stella. I recently heard that poetry is something that should be mandatory to us all, because it is the one art form that forces us to stare into the darkest parts of ourselves without being able to avoid it. So I look forward to read your poetry again. Sally, would you like to take us into, unless the esteemed panelists would like to add a few words?
Oh, very happy to be in this room with brilliant brains and beautiful hearts, and it's amazing. This is the kind of thing I wish I heard and witnessed growing up, and my hope is that on the other side of this platform, there are many other girls and women listening, and boys and men taking notes and planning to act. But thank you for the invitation.
I wonder if Susan has something to sell or talk about. But I want to thank each and every one of you who has joined us today. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you so much for participating in this discussion. It's always a pleasure to learn from each other, but it has been very refreshing learning from female comrades, my sisters. It's a pleasure. I'm very humbled to have shared this space with you. When you talk about sharing power, this is, I think, what you're referring to. Stepping aside and let ladies grow in these spaces and become comfortable, sharing their thoughts and guiding and doing everything that is necessary for us to grow together and to, I guess, make the world a better place. I think change starts with us individually, but it is also upon us to give space to people who may not be as privileged as we are, to take over some of these spaces and share their ideas on how we can together grow a stronger community for everyone. I want to thank Dr. Stella Nyanzi for joining us today, very late in the night. Of course, Susan, thank you so much for joining us very late in Kampala. I think it's past 2 o'clock. Is it past 2 o'clock already? Yeah, so 2 minutes, I think. It's a pleasure. Daria, thank you so much once again. I was with you last week during the Refugee Awareness Week event. It was stellar. So thank you so much for always coming back and sharing your ideas and encouraging young girls to come up and learn from you. Fatima, again, thank you so much for joining us once again. Fatima is one of the award recipients for the African Scholars Awards. So we are delighted to have her in that company. We really appreciate what she does within our community, and we appreciate her. I also want to thank each and everyone who has been joining us from elsewhere online. Mr. Henry Lyombia, Mr. Agwe Salim, Pamakol, Litube, Samuel Kisitu. There are so many. Some of you have, I can't even, Catherine Bate, our senior volunteer coordinator for the African Alumni Association. Everyone has been watching us, the nameless people that I can't even mention right now. Thank you so much for joining us. And without any further ado, I want to wish you a good night, and I will see you in the next, next International Women's Day. I don't think we should wait for another year.
No, we should not wait.
Exactly.
That's fun.
Let's continue these conversations, because that's the point. We shouldn't wait for just today to have these conversations. And right. I am so grateful to all of you.
Right. So why don't you wrap up? I think my remarks are done. So why don't you wrap up again?
Thank you very much. Let's all go forward and do our best in the places that we are. Let's start where we are. The little that we can do around us in order to make each other capable of having safe spaces for us to grow and be brave. Thank you.
Thank you.